Wow, Donkey Kong Bananza is even bigger than we thought. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking even more about Donkey Kong Bananza. The Bananza Direct was yesterday, so many people were impressed by this presentation, and we've already done our initial analysis on this Bananza Direct, but now after a whole day looking even more deeply into it, there are some things I've noticed that are leading me to believe that this game is actually even larger than what we're thinking here, so I'm very excited to talk about this stuff. But on top of that, a few more little things have come out that are giving us a few more details on Donkey Kong overall that I would also like to get into today. But before going forward, let me point out I'm aiming for a goal of 60,000 subscribers, so if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So first I'd like to point out we have a few new renders here. Here's a new render for Donkey Kong, here's a new render for Diddy Kong, and I just want to point out that these aren't renders specifically for Bananza, but just for the overall Donkey Kong brand. But it's nice to see these renders, they look amazing, fantastic, I love them. Now, as many of you may already know, Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong have been confirmed to be in Bananza. And a little neat detail that has been noticed in reference to Diddy Kong is that when on Rambi during the Rambi Rumble, he actually wraps his tail around Dixie Kong to keep her safe, which is a nice little detail to show how protective Diddy Kong is of his partner, Dixie Kong. Moving on to some Nintendo Today app news, we got an update on Donkey Kong Bananza. They show off Pauline, they talk about how she's a 13-year-old girl, we already knew that from the Japanese website, but we see a few new screenshots here, and a little new clip that we did not see in the Bananza Direct. Well, we saw a piece of it, but not all of it, unadulterated by the announcer in the background, different music playing, so check it out. So while yes is all off-screen footage because Nintendo won't allow us to directly capture this footage here, there is something interesting about this reaction from Pauline. It shows that this is how Pauline expects herself to be after having been released from Odd Rock. She realizes she's back to normal. And I think this is important to point out here, as obviously it may seem to some of you, because some people have been theorizing that Pauline gets de-aged through some sort of curse or transformation process by Voidco, which is also factored into the whole Odd Rock transformation here. But the fact that we see Pauline getting back to normal and she's reacting as if she's been brought back to normal, I think this suggests that likely she has not been de-aged. And a lot of people like to talk about this de-aging idea because many people have been concerned about how Bananza connects to the rest of the Donkey Kong and Mario universe here, chronologically, timeline-wise. Because we do see young Pauline riding Donkey Kong's shoulder, and then there's also Cranky Kong, who had kidnapped adult Pauline many years ago. So what's going on there? Well, I've been theorizing that it just comes down to the generations theory. There are many Donkey Kongs, there are many Cranky Kongs, there are many Paulines and Marios and such. When you think about it in this way, I think it's a simple solution to the problem. And actually, Kev Bayless seems to be supporting my theory here. Kev Bayless, the creator of the Donkey Kong design from 1994 in Donkey Kong Country. As Kev Bayless says here, why does everyone get so confused by this stuff? Cranky is DK that was, until DK becomes Cranky, who talks to a new DK, who later becomes Cranky, who then talks to another DK, who would be the great-great-grandson of Cranky, who is a great-great-granddad of DK, until that new DK becomes a new Cranky, who talks to a new DK, and the cycle repeats, I think. Winky face. Obviously, he's having a little fun here, joking around, but I do think there's some truth to it. It speaks to the idea that there are generations of Cranky Kong, Donkey Kong, Pauline, which would make sense as to why we see her as a 13-year-old girl, and by extension this could also have to do with Mario and other characters as well. There are different generations of these characters, and when you think of it in that way, you no longer need to go through all these mental gymnastics to try and figure out and sort out how this all connects and makes sense. If there are just different generations of the characters, it's all possible. Which is probably the best and simplest solution, so Nintendo can still have some semblance of a connected story, and also have the freedom to make the choices they need to make. Like, you look at Pauline, she is a 13-year-old girl, so she's not a full-on adult, which means she's smaller, so she can fit on Donkey Kong's shoulder naturally. If they made her a full-on grown woman, it would be a very different feel and look, so I definitely think that they made this decision for gameplay reasons, but when you account for the generations theory, it can also make sense from a lore perspective as well. But let's now move on to talking about how Donkey Kong Bananza is even bigger than we thought. Now, I find this interesting here. The Donkey Kong Bananza Direct, having only been out for a day, is already at 2.8 million views. It is #1 on trending right now, and if you'll notice, the Mario Kart World Direct, the direct of the most popular Nintendo series, Mario Kart, only has 3.1 million views after 2 months. So within a day, Bananza has already almost caught up to the Mario Kart World Direct. Now, obviously, most of the views come in at first, and so it's not like Bananza is going to have like 20 million views in a couple weeks, I assume not. But it does mean here that the Bananza Direct will almost certainly pass Mario Kart World by a sizable margin here, and I do think there is a correlation between views and sales. Now, I'm not saying that based off this one Direct that Bananza is going to become a better seller than Mario Kart World. In fact, no, I do not think so. I think Mario Kart World will probably be the best-selling game on Nintendo Switch 2 when we're talking about lifetime sales 8 to 10 years from now. However, what I am trying to get at, though, is that perhaps Bananza is going to really appeal to a larger audience than many people were initially expecting, and it's going to sell very well in this first year and hopefully have some decent evergreen sales. But basically, I'm thinking that Bananza is about to become another huge hit by Nintendo. Some of you may not be aware of this, but in that first year of Switch 1, Super Mario Odyssey was a bigger seller than Mario Kart, and Breath of the Wild was just barely behind Mario Kart. Mario Kart went on to sell better than both because it had stronger legs. So over the many years, Mario Kart continued to sell, while Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey did not continue to sell as strongly. They did have strong evergreen sales, strong legs, but not to the same level as Mario Kart. And so I would not be surprised if by the end of this year, Bananza proves to be a legitimate Game of the Year contender. Bananza could become one of the top sellers on Switch 2. Not as much as Mario Kart long term, but still a big seller, and this could be a new beginning of Donkey Kong. I believe that's the plan for Donkey Kong here. I mean, look at Bananza. There's so much ambition and hype going into this. Clearly, Nintendo has invested a lot into Donkey Kong. You look at the Donkey Kong expansion to Super Nintendo World and how it just happened. I think these were all timed for a reason, as we've been theorizing for the last couple years. This is all about a new beginning for Donkey Kong here. And a lot of people have been assuming that the 3D Mario team is the team that has made Bananza. I do not actually think that's the case. I do think the 3D Mario team has had a hand in its development, but what I actually think is going on is going back to a rumor from DK Vine a few years ago that has been totally right about this whole 3D Donkey Kong project, and that's that a new team to make Donkey Kong games was formed, and a part of that came from the Mario Odyssey team. I wouldn't be surprised if members from the Odyssey team went on to make Donkey Kong, and of course there's been assistance with making this game, but there's now a new team to make Donkey Kong. And so this means two awesome things. One, the 3D Mario team, still the 3D Mario team, still working on 3D Mario. That's probably not that far off. But also two, there's a new team making Donkey Kong, and with how amazing Bananza looks, and with how well it's seemingly being received with this Donkey Kong Bananza Direct, this game may go on to sell quite strongly, be a new big hit for Nintendo, perhaps a 10+ million seller, which will then mean that this Donkey Kong team will continue making some big hitting Donkey Kong games forevermore, essentially. Donkey Kong is going to become another big mainstay amongst the other huge Nintendo hitters, and that is amazing to think about. But now on to the actual game part, how this game is looking to be even bigger than we thought, quite literally, in terms of more things we can do and explore. So in the Bananza Direct, they showed off a variety of little cool side things, like the DK Artist mode, there's cooperative play, there's game share, there's a photo mode, but there's also a whole bunch of collectibles. You have all the gold and the bananas, the Banandium, the collectible music discs that you can listen to, the fossils, which are different per layer, by the way, I've noticed. But then also these fossils, the gold, the Banandium can all be used to buy and build up different things. You can buy a whole bunch of clothes that have different bonuses. There are different items like balloons for free lives, or health recovery items, or maps. But then there's also a skill tree that you can continually expand, which adds a whole other layer of gameplay to this game. But this becomes even more mind-boggling when you factor in that we already know about the destruction in Bananza, but they also show off a variety of platforming and attack mechanics that Donkey Kong has. It seems very similar to the depth we saw from Mario Odyssey, and there was so much we could do with just that alone. But in Mario Odyssey, there was no skill tree where you could continually expand the abilities here as you collect more things in the world. You can in Bananza. And then there's the destruction. And all the clothes you collect this time actually have extra perks and benefits. And then on top of all that, there are also the Bananza forms, which require resources, which will have you continue looking around exploring the world. It seems like they have a really good gameplay loop here. As you continue to find and explore different things, these different things help you collect more items, which will improve your abilities and such, which will then have you looking for more things to find in the world. And it's going to be really fun to do with all the different platforming and destruction mechanics Donkey Kong has, including these new Bananza forms, which, by the way, you can change seamlessly between the three we've seen so far. And so there's quite a bit of gameplay variety and a lot of potential, and I'm sure we're going to be experimenting and figuring out different things we can do with this game as the years draw on, I would assume. This game is going to have some legs here. I remember all the discoveries we made in both Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey even years afterwards. I'm getting similar vibes from this game. But there's something I noticed about the skill tree. So as you see from the skill tree here, there are 8 columns. We can only see 4 of the 8 columns. And at first, I thought this meant that we might unlock these columns per layer we get to, so the different worlds, which would then imply maybe there's only like 8 or 9 worlds. But I think there's actually more than that, and we'll get to that in a moment here. What I actually think these columns are pertaining to are things you unlock. So as you see with the first few columns, there are no symbols above them, but with the 4th column there is. There's like a red, thick like Kong here, and if you notice in the background, there is the Kong Bananza form. I believe this icon pertains to the Kong Bananza skills. So there will be individual skills that you can unlock for the different Bananza forms. And as you see, there are still 4 more columns left, but we've only seen 2 other Bananza forms beyond the Kong Bananza form. There is the Zebra Bananza form and the Ostrich Bananza form. Which means there are still 2 other columns here to unlock, assuming when we collect these other Bananza forms, it unlocks those future columns. And looking at what we've seen of the Bananza forms, I feel like with the 3 we have, they kind of get a lot done already. You can fly around, you can run really fast, you're really strong, you can shoot shockwaves. What need is there for 2 more Bananza forms? I'm not entirely sure. I can think of one that makes sense, and that would be swimming underwater. We've seen that there are a few different actual like heavy water levels, and there are things underwater that we can acquire, but as we've seen from base Donkey Kong, all he can do is swim around at the surface. And so maybe there is like a fish Bananza form that we'll unlock later on. This is certainly a possibility. But what about a final 5th form? I'm not sure. Maybe it's not a final 5th form. Maybe it's just like a final column we unlock as a late game skill tree. As late game skills we can have for just base Donkey Kong. It's hard to say, but it goes to show just how much depth there is to the game and how much we can unlock in terms of gameplay possibilities as we dive deeper into the game. Pun intended there. But let's now talk about the different layers to this game as we do dive deeper, because I've noticed that there's quite a few. So we already know officially about at least 4, because those have been named. We know about Ingot Isle, that's the first area, and then it's the Lagoon Layer, the second area, Hilltop Layer, the 3rd area with all the sprawling hills, and then the Canyon Layer, the 4th area. But we've seen other areas, they just haven't been named yet. There is the Forest Ostrich Layer, we're not sure where that is, but presumably not too far off from the layers we've already seen. And then there's also the Snow Layer. And so we've actually seen the zebras in the Snow Layer, so I assume that's where we unlock the zebra form. And we've also seen the Ostrich Forest areas, and presumably that's where we unlock the Ostrich Bananza form. So those 2 other layers have been shown off quite a bit with the gameplay. I think it's safe to assume that we have those other worlds to explore. But there's still more. We've seen actually a lot of new footage for another water area here, and this water area I do not believe is the same as the Lagoon Layer. One reason why I think they are different is because we do see with the backgrounds, they are not quite the same, and it does seem that they use the backgrounds to sort of suggest the different worlds here, or different layers. But also I've noticed that there are different fossils per layer. And so as we see to the right here, there are different fossils for this area in comparison to the lagoon layer. And so I'm fairly certain this is a whole other layer to explore. I'm going to call it the water fruit layer for now. And so that's at least 7 worlds that we can explore in Bananza. But there is still more. We have seen there is some sort of crystal cave layer, and there also appears to be a layer that has storms, torrential storms in the background. There's even like wind blowing, so this might be an entirely separate world as well. And then we also see late into the Direct, there's like this giant like crocodile-like shaped structure behind Donkey Kong and Pauline, but there's like a big pink background. So I don't think this is the ice area, for example. This may also be an entirely other separate layer, and given there's a lot of story sequences going on here, this could be a late game layer, perhaps something relating to the Kremlins and King K. Rool, given the crocodile-like structure as we dive deeper into the world. Maybe this is Croc Core, for example. It's a possibility. We do know there's a goal to aim for the Earth's core. So we have at least 7 for sure layers here, 3 more possible ones that I feel pretty good about being entirely new layers. But there's still more, because we do see another little bit of footage where we see new fossils to collect, and as you see with these symbols here, it's Winky, On Guard, Glimmer. These are animal buddies from prior Donkey Kong games, but there are some important ones we haven't seen in this game yet, they're just fossils. And given this is late into the Direct and is all surrounded by different important cutscenes, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if this is a whole other late game layer as well. And this layer seems to be surrounded by like gold molten lava. It could be molten gold, which does make sense to be a late game layer given this emphasis on collecting gold and getting closer to the core. And then there's this other area we see that at first I assume is the ice world, but the background is different. As I've talked about, the background usually gives us a good understanding of what layer we're in. And so in the ice snow world where the zebras are at, there's like giant like ice crystals off into the distance. Right here we see like a yellow sky, but it is almost like a white sort of like desert area, but there are like blue crystally like statues, but also there appear to be some weird arachnid like creatures. You see those red ones, those blue ones. So this might be like an arachnid world or something like that. I'm not saying it's actually an arachnid world, but I'm not quite sure how else to describe it. And so I want to guess here, there are at least 10 whole worlds to explore, and from what I'm seeing of unique environments that are not challenge course areas, possibly 12, and maybe even more. Because of course, there is always a possibility they have not shown us everything. In fact, that is the likeliest possibility that they have not shown us everything. And yet, even with that in mind, it's looking like there's quite a bit to explore here in terms of these different worlds. And I would also like to add that they do show us what appears to be the world map. You can see the surface where DK Isle is off to the side, that's a nice reference. Ingot Isle is depressed into the ground. And then you can see that there's like 3 big sort of layers to the earth, right? And it looks like the 4 first areas, including Ingot Isle, would be 1, then the next 4, then the next 4, which would add up to 12, which would fit the 12 I've counted for throughout the Direct footage. Of course, we don't know what's at the very core, so there might be just a bit more. But then, as I mentioned earlier, there are the challenge areas as well. There's a whole bunch of them, and as we saw from the Direct, there's a great deal of variety to them, so we're going to have that to enjoy, intertwined with all these different worlds to explore and all the mechanics I've mentioned before. And something else I think is neat are the sinkholes. They mentioned these sinkholes that you unlock when you're going to get to the next area, and we see they're actually playable. So unlike Mario Odyssey, when you go to another world, you just ride on your ship to the next world, it's just like a loading screen. This is actually a playable departure to the next big area of the game. And something else I didn't mention here to sort of further show just how big this game is, these layers aren't just singular layers here, right? So notice how in this gameplay I'm showing here with the sinkhole, there's actually like a marker to the right that shows that Donkey Kong is sinking even deeper into the core of the world. And so each layer has like a certain number, like an SL 101, 102, and so there are levels within the levels, right? As you see here in this section, you can actually fast travel between different layers within an overall giant world layer. In other words, these areas are huge, vast worlds. I would say from what we've seen so far, these layers are bigger than the areas we saw in Mario Odyssey. And so we're looking at evidence that seems to suggest that there's maybe 12 worlds, if not more, to explore, and these worlds seem to be bigger than the worlds we saw in Mario Odyssey. And yet, at the base, in terms of platform mechanics, it seems to be a comparable level of diversity, but then also you can expand on that with the Kong forms, the skill tree, all the collectibles that also have different passive effects as well, and then all the clothes and such. This game, I think, is probably a bigger game than Mario Odyssey, and Mario Odyssey was absolutely huge. To those thinking that this game is going to be maybe like a smaller sort of 3D platforming effort than Mario Odyssey, no, this is a huge deal. This is just a new Donkey Kong thing, and by the way, as I talked about earlier, I don't think it's in replacement or substitution of 3D Mario. I think they are just two separate huge projects that Nintendo's been working on for years, and Donkey Kong Bananza is coming out early on for Switch 2, and it's looking to be quite a big, amazing release. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.